Well, hello, and welcome to that thing we like to call Mania, where we talk all things pop, rock, and prog. I'm very happy tonight to welcome on his debut on the channel. Very happy to have Mr. Tim Derling. How are you, Tim?
I'm really good, Tom. I'm pleased to be on here. Thanks. I'm sorry it's taken so long, but I appreciate the invite. And you caught me on one of the toughest head-to-heads that you possibly could for somebody like me, but that's all right.
Well, I was, as we were talking before we started, it's like, I knew Tim basically. It's almost like Tim kept popping up on Rush fans and Contrarians, and then I saw he did a book on Kansas, and I was like, I really just I gotta. And then we bumped into each other on another channel at one point, and I was like, all right, Tim, that's it. You're coming on my channel.
Yeah, it's like a bad cold. Inevitably, you're going to catch it. That's me.
Oh man.
Yeah, that's right. We were and I can't even remember what we were, but I know we were on something together and my memory is like a sieve. So
Yeah, I did something on was it Logan's channel about Triumph? I was talking about
that's right.
Triumph.
Yes,
And then
that's
you were going
exactly
to
what
do
it was.
something later or something. You were going to jump on later and talk about
I
something
was
else.
going to jump on later and talk about Nazareth. I
Yes.
think that
Yeah,
was that one. Yeah.
that was
Yep.
it. Yes, that's it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but tonight we are here to talk about some hard rock and possibly, some people call it metal. I always sort of veer towards more hard rock, but this is as Tim mentioned earlier, this is just going to be a tough battle, man. But we're gonna talk about two excellent records, in my opinion, by Def Leppard in their prime. So we're talking about 1981's High and Dry versus 1983's Pyromania.
Yeah. I brought my props with me. I
Oh, nice. Eight track.
I
Yeah,
I went old school here.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. So
That's amazing. Look at that. Look at those are like old school. I love it.
those are prized possessions of mine.
Yeah, those are legit.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. So I have to ask you a question though. Do any of the songs fade out in the middle and then fade back in?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's always one of
So yeah, they on program and the songs are mixed up too. The songs are all mixed
okay.
up.
Okay.
So program one has mirror, mirror, look into my eyes fading out. And then program two, it fades back in. Program three has on through the night fading out. And then it fades back in on program four. Uh, and Pyromania has a couple too. Die Hard the Hunter fades out and comes
Oh,
back in. And so does Coming Under Fire.
ouch.
Um, I have, as people that know me, they know that I like collecting. If I like a band, I like their albums. I like collecting as many formats as I can, and that turned into this right above my head, this huge 8-track collection of rock and hard rock albums on 8-track, and led to my first book, which is all about 8 tracks and specifically the ones that came out in the 80s through Columbia House that most people don't know came out on 8 track. So
Right.
um,
Right.
but definitely Def Leppard being one of my favorite bands, I really wanted to find their album. I've got it's only the first three, but I've got them all on 8-track, which they're three of my prized possessions. Although I am missing one. I'm missing the High and Dry reissue from '84.
Oh, right. Right.
That came out on the record clubs in 8-track too, I'm that one's still on my radar. If I ever get a chance to snag that one, I will.
Yeah, and wasn't there like a remix of like Bringing On the Heartbreak or
The
something?
remix of Bringing on the Heartbreak, and it's the first time that Me and My Wine was featured because it was a B
That's right.
side.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
I've just lost half your audience. I'm sure. I'm sorry. So I'll shut up
No,
about eight
no,
tracks.
you have not. You have not. You have not. So no, I think that's great. We get deep here on Curlis Mania. Don't worry about it. This is all good. So quick question for you. This is what I've been doing before we start the battle, and that is, when was it? Do you remember the first time you heard anything off of, for example, High and Dry? Do you remember? Like, when was the first time you heard that album?
It would have been later. It wouldn't have been chronological.
Uh,
I think the first thing I ever heard from Def Leppard would have been Photograph.
Okay.
When Pyromania was out. I remember seeing the album. I think my older cousin had it and was way into it. I would have been 8 or 9. So I wasn't the target audience just yet. But
Right.
fast forward 5 years, and I've gone on record saying Hysteria is my favorite album of all time by
Yeah.
anybody. You
Yeah.
know, so I'm not one of those people that got off the track then. Far from it.
Yeah.
I've seen them a few times in concert, but yeah. So summer '88 is when I really got into Def Leppard. But I think the first thing I would have heard off High and Dry would have been either seeing the video for either Let It Go or Bringing on the Heartbreak. One
Yeah.
of those the old performance videos.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
so my history with Def Leppard, it kind of all starts in '88. So it was a small catalog to pick up. That would have been when I first heard anything from that album.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do remember on MTV them showing Bringing on the Heartbreak. I remember seeing the video for that back in the day. Because they were one of the first to kind of jump on and start doing videos pretty quickly.
That video cost like next to nothing, and that got them a lot of attention. I think it's the reason High and Dry went gold, because the story has it is that they started selling albums in places they hadn't even toured, and they came to find out that MTV was on the air. So
Right.
I grew up, I mean, I'm Canadian, so I grew up in Eastern Canada. So what we had was called Much Music, but they played a lot of Def Leppard. So from '86 on, it was I was just glued to Much Music, watching videos, but
Yes.
yeah, it was fun times. I mean, I think, without sounding like such an old guy, the premiere of a video was an event, right? It was a major
Oh
thing.
yeah. Oh yeah. No, I
Yeah.
remember that. I do remember being same thing, glued to MTV when it first started. And was like, oh my God, this is all music all the time. How cool is
All
this?
the time.
You
Interviews and educate. It was educational. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I credit that with a lot of, the music minutia that floats around in my head to this day.
Yes, exactly. Same here. Same here. And I do remember there were certain videos, there's bands or whatever, you'd be waiting for the premiere of the
Yeah.
video. You'd be all excited, like, oh, it's going to premiere on Friday,
Yeah.
at eight
Oh,
o'clock.
they'd hype it up. There'd be commercials all week for,
Yes.
for a 4-minute video. Now
Right.
you just go on YouTube and watch it. I mean, things change, but that's what it was like. It wasn't, it wasn't just instant access to everything.
No, I mean, this is all, like you said, making us feel old, but it's all pre-internet where you had to
Yeah.
go to buy magazines to read about your bands, and you had to go get the albums and at a store, and you had to,
You'd read about these song titles or something. You're like, oh, I wonder what that sounds like. Well, either if you didn't have a buddy that owned it, or you didn't
right.
buy it yourself, or borrow it from someone to make a copy of it, you weren't going to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not made of money at 12, 13.
No. And I grew up in a small town, so I did not have access to used music stores or anything, so it's but you know what? The stuff that I did discover along the way, I think that's why I remember it so well, because it felt like you'd stumbled upon something.
Yes. Yeah. When you found something, you're like all excited, like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I love this album and I love this band. And you're all pumped up. And yeah, it's like you discovered something.
And Def Leppard was one of the first bands that introduced me to the concept of B-sides,
Yeah.
songs that weren't on the album.
Right.
Um, I
Right.
remember when they were on the American Music Awards in '89 and they did Tear It Down. I was like, what is this song? We found out it's the B-side of Women. Oh, okay. I guess I won't
Oh.
hear that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I remember a buddy of mine had High and Dry, and I remember looking at it. And I was like, who is this band, man? They're like, when you're looking at the back cover, you're like, these guys don't look that much older than me, you
Yeah,
know?
they were young, man. Rick Allen, I think he might have been 17 at
Yeah,
that point.
they were so young. It was crazy how young they were.
Yeah.
But I just remember being just so, and they just intrigued by it, because I was like, they just look so like they look like they're delinquents and they're really young and
They Yeah, they looked like they couldn't grow facial hair if their lives depended on it.
they're not wearing shirts. It's like, who
Yeah.
are these
It's
dudes?
like, yeah, and what's this guy diving into an empty pool? Like,
Yeah.
it's really, it's a weird cover. I mean, it's a hypnosis cover. But
Yes.
it's not, I think that it was one of those I think that was one of those hypnosis covers that they tried to pawn off on two or three other bands. They said, no, we don't want that.
Totally. Yeah.
But Def Leppard, being a young band, were probably like the Prestige of having a Hypnosis cover. They're like, yeah, we'll take it, and then they show it to them and like, oh,
Yes.
but it works. It makes
It
sense. Yeah,
works.
high
I
and
mean,
dry. Okay, I
it
get it.
works. It works, and it's funny because
And
like I thought the same thing. This is probably something Pink Floyd and Zepp already declined. Like, no
and the
thanks.
funny thing is, if you look, the longer you look at this, like those guys that are looking up on the front cover,
Hmm.
sometimes they have a mustache, sometimes they don't.
Oh,
And then not, of course, no back cover on here, but the back cover they're looking down.
yeah. Here's it. They're looking down on the back.
Yeah,
If I can get that, there we go. Yeah.
yeah. So it's weird, but I mean, you're so used to it. You're like, well, I couldn't imagine anything else on the front cover of it.
Yeah, I kind of
So
like it. I kind of like the cover. So there you go. But yeah, so let's run it down since we're talking about it. So High and Dry was the second studio album, released July 6th, 1981 on Mercury in the US. Recorded March through June in 81 at Battery Studios in London. Of course, produced by Mutt Lange. This was the first Mutt Lange record. And the last full album with Pete Willis in the band, essentially,
yeah,
which is kind of, we'll talk more about, I'm sure. He was let go due to alcohol issues, apparently drinking too much and showing up late, and just, I don't know, I'm not sure what was going on. He was kind of slacking off for some reason.
yeah.
So,
My understanding is that he had a pretty debilitating problem to the point where he couldn't play,
yeah,
and Mutt Lange, being the taskmaster, basically said to the guys, "Look, this isn't working. You guys got to do something about this." And it was the first of a lot of difficult decisions that any band that had a career that long has to make.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
and the thing is, like, Pete Willis is like a recluse.
yes.
You
You
never
never
hear
heard
from him.
about him. Yeah, you
He
never.
he disappeared. And it's interesting. I mean, it's one of those things you wonder whatever happened to. And usually you can find these things out on the internet, but I haven't heard from him since he had a band. Seems to me in the early 90s, he had a band called Roadhouse that put an album out.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
that's the last I've heard from Pete Willis.
There you go. I didn't even know that. So there you go. There's, like you said, there's a paucity of info. There's no information on Pete Willis
No.
anywhere.
And it's not like this is an obscure band, right? You'd
No,
think you'd be able to find things out.
you would think. You would think. So anyway, it got to number 38 on the Billboard 200, number 26 on the UK album charts. Bringing on the Heartache, as we talked about, or Heartbreak, sorry, was the single, the video on MTV. It's one of the early videos we just talked about. Let It Go was the other single from this record. We just talked about how the artwork is Hypnosis, which is famous for Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and Yes and all that. Um, they were also by this point getting managed by Lieber Krebs, who was kind of a big management team at the time. They also handled Aerosmith, so they were really, Def Leppard was already on the rise with this record. They were getting some pretty big, powerful people working with them. So yeah. So what's your general thoughts on High and Dry? What do you? I mean, starts out with what is it? I always say Let It
Let
Go.
it go.
Let
Yeah.
It Go. Yeah.
I love I
Quite a
love
rocker. I love that song.
love this album. I love this album. I can remember I have vivid memories of getting in when I got into Def Leppard in summer '88. My cousin had High and Dry on cassette, and I made a dub of that from him. So that was like this, So I bought Hysteria, but High and Dry was the second album I heard all the way through, I think. And I listened to that all the time, like just all the time. I love all the songs on it. I think that, and it's hard to believe that, like you said, these guys were so young, but also um, Mutt Lange produced this album, but he does not figure in on the songwriting at this point.
Good point.
So
That's exactly right. Yeah.
these are all. I think most of the songs were written by Joe Elliott, Steve Clark, Pete Willis. I think Rick Savage features on some of the songwriting. I don't have the credits in front of me, but they had already. It makes sense that they ended up working with a guy like Mutt Lange because they, except for Pete Willis, my understanding is that they never really wanted to just be a straight up heavy metal band. They wanted to be a rock band. They wanted to be an arena rock band like Queen or the Who or
Yes.
Zeppelin. And and
Yes.
and and to
Yeah.
do that, you need to write songs that are catchy.
Right.
And they
Right.
did that. Now this is a heavy album. I mean, it's a heavy album, but
Mhm.
the songs are memorable. They've got hooks, they've got catchy choruses, they've got cool guitar parts, and like Let It Go is just such a perfect
What
way
a
to
what a
to open an album. It just announces itself. It's just such a great song, and it's yeah, I'll never get tired of it. I know this album front to back, and it's a big time favorite of mine. It's one of my. I did a we on my channel we did a ranking episode of albums from 1981, and I can't remember where. I think this was number 4 or number 3. I mean, it was up there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I love this record. I mean,
Yeah,
the first side is like flawless. I mean, like it's just the whole. I mean, the whole record is really strong, but the
yeah,
first side, like, Let It Go with that riff, like you said, that opening riff, and that just, and like you said, never get sick of that song. It's just such a great rocker. It's so hooky, but it's heavy.
yeah.
And
It's
then
got everything,
you
and
know,
already they've got good background vocals, and that was something that they had a leg up on their competition because many years later, Vivian Campbell, who of course a long way from the band at this time, but he said Def Leppard is a rock band that can sing. So
yeah,
4 of the 5 guys regularly sang harmonies, and you can tell it's a full sound, and it just elevated them. They were just on a different track than the other bands of they were considered part of the new wave of British heavy metal, which is an exciting it's an exciting time and it's an exciting movement.
yeah.
But they were just on a different path almost from the beginning because they were just so good.
Yes, yes, I agree. They were different. Like you said, they were more of, you could tell even early on, you can tell that they want to have hooks. Like they're
Even on Through the Night. I mean, On Through the Night's got catchy songs on it too.
yeah.
On Through the Night's a there's nothing to be embarrassed about for that album. They were even younger when they did that. So
Oh no, I like
yeah,
that record a lot. I
but
like
this is a very different sounding. Like you could play On Through the Night for someone that just knows Def Leppard from the songs they've heard on the radio. They might not know that's Def Leppard. You could play High and Dry, and they'll go, "Well, that sounds like Def Leppard, really heavy Def Leppard, but that sounds like Def Leppard." Their sound is
exactly.
there already.
Exactly. But like when they do the whole because I just love I must like it when Pete Willis was in the band because I do like when it's heavy. Like I like the
Yeah,
heavy Def Leppard. And when they do another hit and run and it kind of stops and you hear the background, 1, 2, 3, hit and
yeah,
run. And it's just like, oh my God, that is killer.
yeah,
Stuff like that.
yeah.
And Saturday, Saturday night.
That what? It's funny that High and Dry Saturday Night. That is the closest that Def Leppard ever came to AC/DC. Like
Yes. Yeah.
that could be an AC/DC song. I know Mutt Lang was working with them too, but the drums, the guitar riff, like that, you
Yes.
know, uh, more than anything else they've ever done. This you could be forgiven if you didn't know it and you heard it in a bar somewhere, like not full volume. You're like, well, that sounds like AC/DC.
It totally sounds like ACD.
Yeah,
There's no question. I agree with you.
yeah,
It's definitely could. And there's a lot of moments you're like, ooh, that's an ACDC moment. And I'm fine with that because I love ACDC.
yeah.
I'm fine with it.
But
But
yet,
you know,
but right away, Bringing on the Heartbreak is not
no,
AC/DC.
it's not. You're right. It's not. It's not at all. It's not at all. And that's a killer. The way it's written and arranged, that song, like you said, this is even pre. To your point, I love your point about how like Mutt Lang really wasn't getting involved in the songwriting yet, and at this time, and but they still had the chops to write a song like "Bringing On the Heartbreak," which is
I'm sure that he had, suggestions for them. Things like that section's too long.
yeah,
This is really good. Repeat that. Little things, but that part doesn't make any sense with the rest of the song. Take that out. But he wasn't contributing lyrically or musically. I don't think.
arranged
Uh,
maybe doing arrangement ideas.
Maybe a little arrangement info. Yeah, Bringing on the Heartbreak's pretty sophisticated song for its time. It was, the term power ballad did not exist in 1981, and yet here's Def Leppard with one of the best. And
Yeah,
not only that, but it goes into one of my favorite instrumentals of all time with Switch 625. I
love it.
just, this is a complete song. Like you can sing that guitar riff. Like this is a complete song. And what's cool is I think they always did it this way. Anytime I've seen them, they go into Switch 625. Joe
Yeah,
leaves the stage and the rest of them just jam. It's such a great song.
Steve Clark, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and he man that and I just you wonder I always wonder about like were they in the studio and they went that's just such a killer instrumental, let's just keep it like we don't need it doesn't need vocals, man.
Well, I wonder if it was one of those things where I don't know what the idea was behind that, because they're not a prog band, so it's like, why would you do an instrumental, But I think maybe they might have had, look, this is a really cool riff,
Right.
and for the life of us, I can't think of anything we could sing over this, so let's just have that riff be the lead melody in the song.
Yeah.
You know,
And, I
and it
mean
goes through some cool twists and turns. Rick Allen does some is great drumming on this album. You
yeah.
know, some
Yeah.
great drum fills here, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's just I never get tired of that. It was when I was in my teens, just getting into the stuff. Me and a buddy of mine, we would always, when we would have like video gaming sessions, we'd always uh, make cassettes full of instrumentals,
Right.
like whatever instrumentals we could find off various albums, and this would always be on them.
Yes.
Never, we'd never do one without this song.
Yeah, absolutely. And then yeah, I mean and that but they do those, those vocal kind of
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, and I think that's a little bit of that's a
very
Queen influence,
Queen
I think,
like. Yes, very
very much.
yeah. You can tell Queen was an influence on them. There's no
Oh yeah,
question.
yeah.
But yeah, and then side two, what's your take on side two? I mean, I love the song On Through the Night, and I think that's a great track. And I think I mean I also love No No No. It's just so heavy.
That's a
Heavy.
closest. That's a fast, heavy one. Yeah, you got to be on your toes for that one. On Through the Night's fun. I think it's a great song, but I think they're paying tribute to Queen, um, and I think they're paying tribute to Led Zeppelin. I'm not sure who was the first to do this, but the idea of having a song, a song named after an album, but it's not on that album, because Led Zeppelin did that with Houses of the Holy. They had the song Houses of the Holy
Right.
recorded, but it's not on that album. It's on Physical
On
Graffiti.
physical, right, exactly.
And then Queen did Sheer Heart Attack 3 years before. No, sorry. Wait now. Yes, Queen did a song called Sheer Heart Attack, but it didn't come out till 3 years after the album Sheer Heart Attack. So I've got to think this is why they did that. It's like,
Yeah.
just being kind of tee hee hee, look at us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's a great song. It's got so many cool parts to it. The guitar parts, the interweaving guitar parts. It's you can tell that Queen was an influence. With Brian May overdubbing and stuff. I also hear, I've been listening to more and more Thin Lizzy of late. I hear a lot of Thin Lizzy and Def Leppard sound.
Yes.
Uh, the
Yeah.
twin lead guitars, and just the way that the two guitars uh, act with each other in relation.
Yeah.
Just strong. Like, the album does not run out of steam. I think Lady Strange is great. And I think the other song that kind of points, along with Bringing on the Heartbreak, that kind of points the way to their future is Mirror Mirror Look Into My Eyes, because
Yes.
it's heavy, but it's a little bit more melodic. It's like a dark melodic song. Yeah,
You
there's good
kind of
variety on this. It's not a singular, like, here's 10 songs all in the same key, all in the same tempo. It's quite varied. It's just, and it's well sequenced,
Mhm.
and that's important too. And it's just, to me, it's just been, I can play that album in my head without even putting it on. I've heard it so many times.
Yeah, and there's like you said to your point, there's more sophistication on this record than you remember. Like when you put it on, you crank it up, you're like, wow, you like you said, there's a power ballad there. Okay, this is more like heavy metal. This is more like like an early metal song or something. This one's more like you hear acoustic guitar openings, and there's lots of there's an instrumental. There's a lot of diversity on this record that you forget how diverse it is.
And like you already mentioned, another hit and run, which is a great song, but the dynamics in that song, how it kicks in, but then it pulls back, and then it kicks in again, and like, yeah, there's great use of what Jimmy Page used to call light and shade.
Yes.
Just, and making a song interesting all the way through, so that you never get that fatigue of, like, this is really repetitive, but they're always throwing a different part at you
Yeah.
that works with the rest of the song. It doesn't take you out of the song; it just adds to it. And
Yeah.
here they are, at not at a peak, but I mean, they're already great songwriters, great arrangers, great players, and putting together a pretty sophisticated album for, like you said, guys in their very early 20s, and in some cases, like I think in Rick Allen's case, not even out of his teens yet.
It's crazy. That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, really amazing record. I really like High and Dry. I love High and Dry. I think it's a great hard rock record. It's a really good. And even like, I just love the way that the two guitars, you mentioned this a little bit, but the way the two guitars intertwine, with Pete Willis and Steve Clark, just and the tone of the guitars is just, ooh, just perfect. And
Yeah.
and Joe Elliott's vocals. I mean, Joe just he sings his heart out on this album, you know?
Yeah, it's funny, and Joe would be the first to say he's never been a singer, but I can't imagine anybody else singing for this band. And he always gives it everything he's got.
Yeah.
And one thing, almost as great as having a virtuoso singer, like just an expert singer, is having a distinctive one. And
Right.
Joe Elliott's voice as soon as you hear it. It's a signature for the band.
Yeah. And he
You
can
know,
really get that grit. He really can get,
yeah,
when he wants to, he can get that grit and he goes high with the grit. It's like, oh, I love that. That's
yeah.
awesome. So, but yeah, so yeah, there you go. There's High and Dry. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about it, but it's,
No, except that the '84 reissue, it contains what I think kind of a pointless remix of "Bring On the Heartbreak." They put some keyboards in it, but whatever. But "Me and My Wine" was the original B-side of "Bringing On the Heartbreak." Obviously, it was recorded at the same time as the rest of the songs. I've all because when I first bought this album, that was all you could find was the '84 reissue. I've always considered it part of the album,
right.
so I
Right.
think it's worth talking about. It's another great song. I don't know where it would have fit in sequence of the album if it but it's a great song, and I didn't
Oh,
want to
yeah.
because once the remix went out of print, it became hard to find until the box set started coming out. So I wanted to give a shout out to that song. They did do a
Absolutely.
video for it, so it's out there.
Yeah, and really, wasn't it? They just basically they were just trying to piggybacking on the huge success of Pyromania at that point, right? It was
That's
like,
exactly what happened.
yeah,
Mercury put the remix of High and Dry out, and I actually talk about this in one of my episodes. The only time, like, people know Bringing On the Heartbreak quite well. It ended up getting a lot of airplay. The band, it's probably the oldest song the band always does live.
yep,
Um, but the only time it ever charted was the '84 reissue. It only got to number 61 on Billboard, which is a shame. But I think a lot of people think of it as one of their hits. And I guess it kind of is, but it wasn't a top 40 hit.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's just it's a fantastic album. It's a all-time favorite.
Very, very much so. Excellent, excellent. So let's move on to another amazing record, which they released the next, or I was going to say the next year. No, it was 2 years later, actually. So it's there you go. There it is on 8-track. It's their third studio album. It was released January 20th, 1983, on Vertigo in Europe and Mercury again in the US. So just a couple points on it. It's the first album to feature Phil Collin on guitar, not Phil Collins, Phil Collin. Um, he started this album started with Pete Willis, and I guess I think he's on this record pretty a lot.
I think rhythm guitar on every song he's credited with, and he co-wrote most of the songs.
Yeah, so he's all over this record.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure, which suits me great. It suits me fine. So, again, it's a Mutt Lange production. It got to this album just exploded. It got to number 2 on the Billboard 200, number 4 in Canada, number 18 in the UK, which was like new for that. I mean, wasn't it the UK? They were always big in the US, but the UK was slow to.
It took them a long time to break in their home country
Yeah.
because there was a backlash because they did kind of make it in the U.S. for some reason that tended to people didn't like that. I don't know why. It doesn't
Like,
make
you
any
guys are
sense.
traitors.
Yeah, something like that. But I mean, don't most bands want international success. So I guess I've never really understood that attitude. But
No.
yeah, it Pyromania was it hardly sold anything in the number 18. Like that seems, yeah, it's impressive,
Yeah,
especially by today's standards, but it's surprising, because it was top five, top three, most countries in the the developed
yeah,
world, right? The only
absolutely.
the only thing that kept it out of the top spot in the States was Michael Jackson's Thriller album, which kept a lot of albums out of the top spot.
That's right. And you hear that a lot. You always hear that like the
Van
only
Halen
yes.
1984
Yes,
couldn't
exactly.
topple it. Yeah,
Exactly. I was just gonna say there's other albums that had the same thing. Well, it couldn't, would have been number one if it wasn't for Michael Jackson kind of thing.
yeah,
Um, so yeah. So yeah, it eventually sold 10 million copies in the US. I mean, that's just insane. The singles were Photograph, Rock of Ages, and Foolin'. And of course, those were also videos that were on heavy rotation on MTV at the time as well. And I'm sure that really propelled the album. I mean, that just really helped it a lot.
absolutely it did. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and they were good video. I mean, at the time, they were good videos. I remember watching them,
And
being
I
like, "Oh,
think,
these
you
are
know
cool."
what? They've held up rather well. I think there's some production value there.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe the Rock of Ages video is a little silly, but the song was meant to be silly. But I think the photograph video still looks cool.
yeah. I like the
You know?
photograph video. Yeah, with the Marilyn Monroe thing and the yeah,
Yeah,
cool. Yeah. So, and I just remember this record being like
everywhere.
everyone had it. Everybody owned it. Like it was just everywhere. I mean, in my class, I remember like tons of people owned it. Like they had the boom boxes with the cassette and
Yeah,
oh my God, it was just everywhere. And I just hearing Photograph and Foolin' and just those singles were just ubiquitous at the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was a huge crossover album, and it had a lot to do with harder rock bands being able to sell millions and millions and millions of albums and have radio hits, and get to a level of success that previously bands that played heavy rock just there was a ceiling, right? You
Yeah.
didn't sell, bands like that didn't sell 5, 6, 7 million copies. They might sell two. you
Right.
know
Right.
there's never been anything. There had been bands and there had been albums that had pointed the way, but everything meshed with Pyromania, and it was just the right time. MTV was still in its infancy, but um those videos just made them instant stars anywhere that had MTV. And I think it's important to note, when MTV came on the air in 81, it's not like everywhere in the US had it. It took a long time for it to become, everywhere.
True.
But
That's
everywhere that did have it, people were just buying those out. They couldn't buy the albums fast enough.
yeah. I think this was one of those because I have some buddies that worked at record stores and I always quiz them about like what were the albums that you like basically like handed them out of the box to people like
Yeah,
I'm sure this was one of them. Like this
yeah,
thing was selling so fast.
yeah. There's twice, because I started buying my own music probably around 87. And I remember, the one time I remember going to my record store to buy an album and it wasn't there, and I had to wait like a week for the next shipment to come in, was the first Skid Row album.
Okay. All right.
So
Okay.
that's an album that they couldn't ship them out fast enough at one point.
Yeah. Yeah. Is 18 in Life on that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I love that song. um, but yeah, no, I mean, it's funny how like there's certain records that just like, oh my God, this thing is just we can't get them, we can't get
They
the
took on a life of its own.
yeah, we can't get the boxes fast enough. People are buying them like so fast. But this album did. You're right. It was you just said it. It was like perfect timing. It was the band was just hitting on all cylinders. Their trajectory was just going like this, and this album just hit right at the right time, the right band at the right time. And like you said, there wasn't a lot of I mean, this is still a heavy record, and
It's quite heavy. Yeah, it's
heavy.
quite. Yeah,
And for a band this heavy to be selling like that was impressive.
yeah.
You know?
Something that I think is, important to note too is just what this did for hard rock music. And the example I'll give you is that, my wife and we were driving somewhere, and at the time she had, Sirius XM in her vehicle, and we were listening to, the '80s on 8 channel, and
Hmm.
they replayed, um, a top 40 from 1983, a Billboard top 40 chart from 1983. Now, what they would do, and what I liked, is it wasn't just a rerun of like one of the Casey Kasem ones, which were great, but this was a contemporary one, counting down the songs and talking about the artists in the present, but they were counting down the songs in the order that they were that week, whatever week it was in 1983. And it was pretty poppy. It
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
it was great music, but it wasn't hard rock. You had, Lionel Richie, and you had, I think, Cyndi Lauper, and you had Human League and Duran Duran. And I think it was Rock of Ages that was in the chart that week. And
Yep.
by way of comparison, it sounded so heavy based on the other, even bands that I love, like there was a Journey song in the chart. This was different. This
Right.
was heavy, distorted, saturated electric guitar,
Right.
and by far the heaviest thing in the chart that week. So it even back then, it was still, the doors were still being kicked open for bands like this to say, hey, we can write catchy songs too. We're just going to do it our way. We're going to do it in
Yes.
our style. And people seem to like it. But I remember thinking about that. I'm like, that must have sounded like, people now think of them as it's pop metal, it's hair metal, or whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
But it didn't sound like that in 1983 compared to what else was on top 40 radio. It was heavy,
That's a
you
great
know.
point. Yeah.
But
That's a great
it just, and I think that's something you kind of take for granted because they became so big.
point. Hmm.
But the you got an idea of the impact, and if somebody was, somebody just had their radio on in the house, or if you were working an office job and you had your radio on, which a lot of people still do, um, alongside the typical top 40 radio stuff of the time, where you might get a little guitar out of Huey Lewis and the News with the Cars or something like that. Now here comes Def Leppard, and it made such a difference. In a few years' time, it wasn't such a big deal. You'd
Right.
have more bands like that in the top 40. Of course, that all went away in the 90s, but man, yeah, they changed the landscape musically. They
Yeah.
absolutely did.
That's a great point. They were really the first band to really sort of kick in the doors for that, and because did get heavier as the '80s went on, right? But
Well, some might say Quiet Riot, because Mental Health was a really
right,
big album at the
that's
time.
true. That's
But
true.
the thing is with Def Leppard, they were able to sustain that success and keep going.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, Quiet Riot would have sounded heavy in '83 too, but I think that came a little later in the year.
Yeah. Yeah. There
So
you go. Yeah.
so yeah, it was, and it made a lot of bands, new and established, go, what can we do to get a little bit of that? So you see a lot of bands, even bands that had been around for 15 years at this point, trying to steal a few tricks from the Def Leppard, and it
Yeah.
would never be just right. It would never be quite the same, right? But
Right. Right.
but yeah, it was, if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, they had a lot of that.
Oh God, they had a lot of imitators, no
Yeah.
question about it. So what are some of your, I mean, of course, I still think the singles just still sound great today. They still stand up. I don't really
Yeah.
Foolin' to me, I just still love Foolin' to death. But there's other songs on this record that really, like, to me, that are almost just as good or better, like Too Late for Love. I just love that track.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
what's your take on this record? What do you
Too
think?
Late for Love is, I'm really surprised that wasn't, really pushed as a single.
Yeah.
Had a video shot for it. I know videos were expensive. They did 3 videos from this album, and at the time, I think that was considered a lot.
That was a
But
lot back in the day.
but Too Late for Love had the potential to, you know, at least hit the top 40.
Could have been a fourth single.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really well constructed. Yeah, I mean, the opener, Rock Rock Till You Drop, that's made to open shows with.
Killer.
So is Stage Fright.
Yeah.
Stage Fright is one of my favorite Def Leppard songs.
Stage Fright's so good. Yeah.
And it's still got heavy stuff on it, like Die Hard the Hunter. That's a heavy song.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
It's, Billy's Got a Gun. But yeah, I think the singles have all held up well. I never, I still, they come on the radio, crank it up,
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, Photograph is an example of, you want to write a melodic hard rock song? This is how it's done.
Oh, that's like Exhibit A. Exactly.
It's a template.
Yes.
You,
Yes.
and it's like, by the way, you won't get better. You won't improve on it. You can only hope to do almost as good. Um, but yeah, it's. I mean, Foolin'. Wow.
Oh,
Even though Foolin' has almost like a ballad texture in the verses, when that kicks in, that's heavy.
I love when it kicks in. I love it.
Like that's just riffing. It's just pure riffing.
And just that
Yeah, I mean it's
foolish.
fantastic. It's
Yeah. Killer.
it's so good. Yeah, and again, you got Mutt Lang this time around though. Mutt is featuring it on the songwriting. I
Yes.
think that Phil Collen was brought in at this point because I think the album was almost recorded. So I think Phil did solos. I don't know if he's playing any. I don't know if he's playing any riffs on there. If that's all Pete Willis. See, Pete Willis is credited on 4 of the 10 songs. So
Yeah.
even though he was let go of the band, if he was smart with his money, he would have done okay with
I was
songwriting
I was gonna
royalties.
say that
Right?
guy's got money. If he, I mean, this thing
Yeah,
sold like bucket loads. He's got a lot of writing credits. Exactly.
yeah. But
So
Mutt Lang's
on
credited on
every
all 10
song,
songs this time. So
he's on
um,
every song. Um,
and I just now learned something I didn't know before. Sometimes Wikipedia comes through. I know it can be edited and it can be not true, but anybody that's ever let the album play all the way to the end knows that when Billy's Got a Gun ends, you have this weird electronic
yeah,
drum thing.
yeah, very odd. Yeah,
It does that for about 56 seconds.
right.
Apparently, there's a name for that. I didn't know that part had a name. It's called the March of the Wooden Zombies.
Oh, there you go.
This is the day that I learned that, and because it's not credited anywhere on the album, it's like
It's like
I
a
can
hidden
think of
track.
I can think of a couple other examples of that. At the end of Van Halen's "Women and Children First" album,
Hmm.
the last song in a simple rhyme. Once it completely fades out, there's a little drum and guitar thing that comes in. Apparently, that's called growth.
That's right. That's
That
right.
do do
Yes.
do
Yes.
dun, 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 that's called
Yes.
growth.
Right.
And I also remember way back, um, Bon Jovi "Slippery When Wet," how it starts off with the first song is "Let It Rock," but it starts off with a synthesizer kind of fanfare. Apparently, that section's called "Pink Flamingos" for some reason. So,
Okay. All
so
right.
there you go.
Well,
But
it's
none of these things are written on the albums anywhere, so it's
right.
like an inside thing, I guess.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the Van Halen thing because I remember I read an Eddie Van Halen book and he starts talking about growth and he's like the growth at the end of Women and Children. I'm like, what? Like I'd never heard it before. I was like, what? I always
Yeah.
turn it off after a simple rhyme. All of a sudden I found it. I was like, oh, here it is.
My understanding was that was supposed to lead into the next album and start the first song off, but they forgot.
Oh, they forgot about it.
They
Yeah,
forgot about it.
that's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. But yeah, this is just a killer record. I mean, it's just, this is the album where they really fuse. You talked about Photograph being just such a great, well-written song, and it is. And all of these songs feel so tight and so well arranged. And like you said, I think Mutt Lang was really, really getting involved and really helping them to craft these songs into like really just killer songs. And I think that this album feels like the synthesis is just really it's on fire. Like it's just on fire. There's not a bad song on this record, really. There's not.
Yeah, there's no filler here. I mean, even the songs that are, if you were going to rank the songs on here, maybe the songs that are at the bottom of your list would be, for any other band, they would be the singles.
Exactly.
The songwriting quality was just, they really worked hard making sure that and that's a Mutt Lang thing too. That's
Yeah,
a Mutt
it
Lang thing.
is.
That's, there cannot be any filler on this album.
Yes, exactly. And Mutt
Yeah.
Lang is kind of like it's like a version of Quincy Jones, because Quincy Jones said the same thing about
A
Thriller.
little bit. I mean, and that was, that was kind of the approach they adopted, because why can't we have a bunch of songs off of an album? Which that didn't happen.
That was new. That was new.
That didn't happen with hard rock bands. If a hard rock band got lucky and had a top 40 single, almost as a fluke, I don't think like Aerosmith never had more than two off an album in the
Right.
70s.
Right.
Uh, the only example I can think of an album in the 70s, a hard rock album that had three top 40 singles on it, is Alice Cooper's Billion Dollar Babies, because he had Hello Hooray, Elected, and No More Mr. Nice Guy. That was rare in 1973. But then again, Bob Ezrin is kind of in that Mutt Lange school of, he's not just a producer getting sounds. He's a songwriter. He's an arranger. He takes over the project.
Yes, and he's
So it kind of
interesting.
makes sense that an Alice album would do that. But other than that, you'd have one here, maybe two here, another one here. They'd never all be on the same album. So
Yeah.
that started to change here. That we're entering the era, not just for hard rock, but for music in general. And maybe Michael Jackson started this off, but where you'd have 4, 5, 6, 7 hit songs off one album. They'd become their greatest hits unto themselves. It was beginning here. And for a band like Def Leppard to have 3 top 40 singles, none of them were top 10, by the way. I think people might forget that. Photograph was the most successful. It peaked at 12.
Okay.
Again, you have to look at it in context of the time. To get all the way to number 12 with a song that relatively heavy, you had to have something special. You had to have something where people that didn't normally like heavy rock were singing along with you.
Yes, that was an accomplishment at that time. And
Yeah.
to, like you said, these producers, people like Quincy Jones, people like Mutt Lange,
Yeah.
people like, you mentioned God, Alice Cooper,
Bob Ezrin.
Ezrin.
Yeah.
These guys were like, if I'm working on this record, I want it to be a hit. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't do any good to just be okay. I want
yeah,
this to be the best record that you can put together, possibly at this point in your lives. The very best songs you can write. Do not settle for anything.
yes, yes. And I have to bring this up really quickly. So there's this, I don't know if you've seen, there's a Def Leppard biopic. I don't know who did MTV or VH1 did it
Oh,
or something.
VH1. I know exactly the one.
You know what I'm talking about?
I think it's called Hysteria. Anthony Michael Hall is in it. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, I've seen it. It's been a long time, but I have seen it.
It's
Yeah.
Anthony Michael Hall is Mutt Lange.
Mutt Lange, who
And
doesn't. If you've ever seen Mutt Lange, he doesn't look anything like him.
okay, well, anyway, but it's the one thing that's I find funny about that. I watched it, and it's what's funny about that movie is that they call, and who knows how accurate it is. I think it's pretty accurate, but they get a call from Mutt Lange who's like, "Hey, it's Mutt Lange, and I want to produce your next record." And they're like, "Yeah!" They're like going crazy, celebrating in the kitchen or whatever. Yeah, and then they cut like the next scene. They cut to them in the studio, and they're all just sitting there like this, like. And it's like he's like, do it again, do it again,
Yeah,
do it again.
Joe Elliott would say that in interviews. He'd be like, "We called him the do it again machine. It was like a train. Do it again, do it again, do it again." And it was, but at the end, they would say he was right.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
just not there yet. We're skipping ahead a little bit, but there was a series out of the UK that Eagle Entertainment put out called Classic Albums, and they put these videos, these home videos out of a classic album, and they would talk to the artists, talk to the producers and engineers. It's a great series. Unfortunately, they stopped making episodes, but there's one on the Hysteria album, and I don't know at what point, but there's an interview with Mutt Lange, a historical one, because he never does interviews, but he said, "I just knew we didn't have the record yet." So he could almost see past, the rest of the guys are like, "Come on, we're done. This is good." And where he's like, "I think you got another one in you. I think you can do a little better."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's been, you know, and I mean, he's worked with so many different artists, and you can almost always tell when a Mutt Lange production is going on, and it doesn't matter whether it's Shania Twain or the Cars
The
or
Cars. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, um, but yeah, I mean, it
Foreign.
definitely made a difference, and I think that Def Leppard were a band that were young enough and willing enough to listen to this guy and say, "Okay, I think he knows what he's talking about."
Yeah, absolutely. No, they were very willing to take his direction, and it all worked out very, very well for them. So
Yeah.
so I would say, I think we have come to that moment of truth, which is really hard.
Oh boy.
Where we say when the rubber hits the road.
Yeah,
Which and it's like we were joking around earlier. It's like which album this week? I mean, it's really these are both like I don't know if they're 5-star albums for me, but they're 4 stars for sure. Both of them 4 out of 5 at
that's
least.
what we're doing. We're doing another five.
But you
Okay.
don't have to. But it's just I'm just throwing it out.
Well, to me, it's within degrees. It really is because I think they're both near flawless albums. And Photograph is in my top five of favorite Def Leppard songs ever. Probably favorite songs by anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, I'm going to buck the trend and I'm going to go with High and Dry as my favorite of the two, at least at this point in time.
Okay.
But look, and if I'm gonna rate these out of 10, I'm saying that High and Dry is a 10 and Pyromania is 9.5. I mean, it's silly little tiny differences, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing on either album that's, I'm looking at it as with High and Dry, the well known songs, Let It Go, High and Dry, Saturday Night, Bring on the Heartbreak, you know, those are good, really good songs, but I don't think they're elevated so much more than everything else on the album. Um, Whereas Pyromania is an excellent album from start to finish, but I think those three singles, there's a reason those were the three singles. There's a reason that they were hits. And when I look at songs like Photograph and Foolin', and I weigh them against songs like Action Not Words and Coming Under Fire, which are still fine songs,
Mm-hmm.
I just think that pound for pound, song for song, High and Dry is just, you know, direct hit after direct hit. Not hit song, but just they got it right every single time. And it just, yeah, to me, it's just that little bit above. And it's not easy because I think they're both, Pyromania, I would never call a lesser album.
Right. Right.
But I think it's not so much about liking Pyromania less. It's about liking High and Dry so much.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
guess if there's an answer in there somewhere, that's what mine is.
Well, it's funny because I came into this thinking this is going to be High and Dry for me, and it's I think after listening, I did my homework this week, and I just kept going back and forth and back and forth, and I think I got to go Pyromania, which I mean, it's
I mean,
just
you can't go wrong
you can't go
either
wrong
way.
with either of them, really.
No.
You just can't, and just it just depends what mood you're in, right? And for some
Yeah.
reason, maybe this just hit me in the right mood or something, and I listened to this and I was like, oh my god, Pyromania is just so damn good, and it's just but that being said, I think I like some of the songs on High and Dry better. So it's like winning by a hair. It's like
Yeah.
it's a hair. It's like
If it was easy, everybody'd be doing it. But yeah,
exactly.
it's not easy doing these things. It would be much easier if you were rating a really crappy album by a band you liked and then one that you did like. This is not the case. These albums are toe to toe.
Yeah, this one's
Really
making me
strong
sweat.
albums.
This battle's making me sweat.
Yeah. Yeah, but you sure see the difference that hit singles make in an album sales because High and Dry, I'm just checking. Like I know that it's sold well.
Mhm.
At this point in time, I mean it's a double platinum album in the States, platinum in Canada. It's sold well, but for me, to me, it should be up there. It should have sold more, but it just didn't have that moment where everybody went out and bought it. 2 million is pretty impressive for an album this heavy.
Nothing to sneeze at. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
nothing to,
yeah,
especially in '81, where it was still the beginning of the whole new wave of British
yeah.
thing. So yeah, no, there you go, folks. I mean, we're doing the best we can here. We're struggling, both of us, because
I think you can tell. Yeah, we're just like, oh, jeez.
these are both amazing records. So you cannot lose with either of them. If you're not familiar with, I mean, I don't know if you wouldn't be, but if you're not familiar with any of these, you got to just like immediately go check it out.
And I'd like to add, Tom, real quick. I mean, I know that a lot of people stopped with Def Leppard after Pyromania. Did
Right.
not like Hysteria. Hysteria is my favorite album of all time. That's when I got on board and I went back. I
Right.
get it. But if what you think Def Leppard is all about is Pour Some Sugar on Me and Love Bites, and, you might be surprised how heavy, especially High and Dry is. And you might
Yes.
be like,
Yeah.
wow, I didn't know they had it in them.
Right.
They started, they were a heavy band.
Hmm.
And I think, they've never shied away from High and Dry because there used to be a time when they would play the entire side one in concert. I mean, even in recent years. So,
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah, I would just
Okay.
say, you might be surprised. Don't let the press fool you in saying, oh, Def Leppard, they're a pop band. Really?
No, they're not.
This
High
is not
and
a
Dry.
pop album.
High and Dry
So,
is not a pop record now,
no.
not at all.
So,
It's a great
anyway.
hard. I always call it hard. I just think it's really hard rock. I just love it. It's like
It's
perfect.
not. I wouldn't call it heavy metal because it's not. I don't know. These are old school terms, but there's nothing goth about it. You know what I
Right.
mean? There's nothing really dark about it, but
Yes.
it's heavy hard rock.
Yeah, and that's so right up my alley. I just love
Yeah,
that. I think it's
yeah.
great. So anyway, all right. Well, we've been just gushing about these albums, and believe me, I think it's the right thing to be doing. So, but Tim, thanks again for joining me tonight. It was really
This
fun.
it's been fun. As many times as I've listened to these albums, any excuse to listen to them again is fine with me.
Absolutely, and of course, go check out his. Do you have a website, Tim?
Well, my YouTube channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions, I've been doing for over 10 years. And if you go to timsvinylconfessions.com, it'll take you to my YouTube page. I just kind of rent that URL so someone else doesn't use it.
Got it. Got it. So Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Go check out his books. He's got several books at this point, which is just very cool. And he's also, you see him all over the place. He's on Rush Fans. He's on. We've already talked about that, Contrarians, all that
It's
stuff.
like that guy again, really?
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. I think it's amazing. So check him out. And also, of course, if you like this video, if stayed with us this long, we appreciate it. Give it a like. Please hit subscribe. It really helps the channel. I always have to say that. It doesn't take a minute. It takes a second. Just hit subscribe.
Doesn't cost you anything. I tell people the same thing because there's a lot more people watching than have subscribed. So
Exactly. It's
take
like
a second.
you
Yeah.
get all these, you get you're a YouTuber, you'll get certain videos that have these huge numbers, and you're like, nobody subscribed from that. Like nobody hit
Yeah,
subscribe.
I don't. It does. It's a weird. I can't. I don't. I can't pretend to figure out. I think it's completely
Yeah.
random. Yeah, it never hurts to remind people to hit the subscribe because
Yeah.
I've done it too with channels I've been following for years, or I've been watching for years, and I go, "Holy crap! I've never subscribed." Oh, okay, there I go. Fix that up. So,
Fix it right now. Exactly.
yeah, I'm almost embarrassed. It's like, oh, geez.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, everybody. We appreciate it. Go listen to Def Leppard tonight. Just crank it up. And we'll see you next time on Curless Mania. See ya.